Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. Throughout any relationship, conflict is inevitable, and it can look different in different seasons or settings. A core discipleship issue in the new family of Jesus is learning how to resolve conflicts maturely. Oftentimes, Jesus' words in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers," are misunderstood to mean avoid conflict at all costs so no one gets hurt, or just be nice, or don't disrupt the status quo by speaking up. But this is a tragic misinterpretation of what peacemaking really is. In this episode, Carley and I explore how Jesus modeled true peacemaking with radical and disruptive kindness. A kindness that challenged, disrupted old patterns, and called us into deeper growth. A kindness that even risked disconnection for the sake of deeper intimacy. We also talk about a few different conflict traps that are easy to fall into and some of the keys for navigating conflict well. Listen in. Well, Carley, today we're diving into navigating conflict well. And honestly, I feel like this topic deserves a drum roll.
So true.
Because it's such an important one.
And a hard one.
Yeah, such a hard one. I'd love to start with something that Pete Scazzero says in Emotionally Healthy Relationships. He points out that many Christians struggle with resolving conflict.
Yes.
And that's something I can definitely personally relate to.
Right there with you.
But he identifies two main reasons why. First, common misunderstandings about what peacemaking really is. And second, a lack of training or equipping in how to handle conflict well. So I'd love to begin by exploring that first reason. What do you think are some common misconceptions about peacemaking today?
Oh, this is so rich, this whole conversation around peacemaking, because I don't know about you, but growing up in the Christian culture, peacemaking often meant peacekeeping, which is very different. And so that just how easily those can be misinterpreted. And so I think of often like what we're called to be loving. And so that means being agreeable, right? And we've kind of talked about that last time with the ladder of integrity and how this builds off of that, right? Because if we're true to our values, peacemaking is actually moving towards true peace. And I think this is what Jesus is talking about, right? When he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And so there is this invitation to wholeness. And so that peace in the New Testament, the Greek word there is eirene, I think is how it's pronounced. And it's the wholeness, right? It's this reuniting what has been separated. And so I see this so differently now, having explored it and studied it, to be able to see peace as bringing together. So my call as a believer, right, is to bring true peace, to bring true wholeness. And so if we are living in pretense, that is false peace, and it's not actually bringing forth fruit. Just ignoring bad behavior or harmful behavior even is not peacemaking. It's peacekeeping, and often is moving out of a place of fear, right, of rejection, or maybe perpetual harm, or just not wanting to have to deal with it because it's hard. And it is, right? We're rightfully so. And I think this is why Jesus blesses it, because he's saying it is hard and you are blessed, right? You will be I think there it's even this idea of flourishing. Like flourishing happens when we move towards hard things and lean into repair and bring together what we feel like has been torn apart. So that's, I do believe, what the depth of this can be. It's an invitation to wholeness. It's an invitation to repair. And how easily it gets disconnected is oftentimes just because that's our cultural upbringing, right? Be a nice person, be a good boy or a good girl. And it kind of limits our ability to name the things that are harmful or not helpful to being in relationship with one another.
Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the difference between being nice and being kind. And I think we often mistake shallow, conflict-avoidant niceness with true kindness. But real kindness, I'm learning, has this disruptive nature to it. It leans into conflict. It disrupts unhealthy patterns. It asks us to receive, and it calls us into this deeper kind of growth. And Pete talks about how Jesus modeled this so often in the Gospels, embracing conflict as a central part of his mission. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, there's so many different accounts, right, of Jesus kind of breaking down the walls of hostility. Even as we're talking about this, something that's coming up for me is this recognition that it was all about being with people, like connecting people, right? And so when we're thinking about speaking even in this context of like love and moving towards true peace, I think there can be a challenge with like, I need to tell the truth about this. And sometimes the tone and texture and timing of that can be actually not peacemaking. But there also is a time and a place for disrupting what I think Jesus often, when we look at his ministry, he was constantly disrupting like the religious hypocrisy. He was constantly disrupting the injustice of the poor and the needy, and becoming an advocate for those that maybe the religious communities were against. And so that's something that is really powerful to look at. Even just the model of like family in scripture, how he includes like all people in that are following and moving towards a relationship with him. And so those are the things that I see the most, where that Jesus just like was completely a revolutionary in his time to be able to move things towards, right? It's all about uniting things to himself, right? All things in and through him. And so when I think about the narrative of scripture, and we see this, right, perpetually, this rupture and disconnection with us and with God and others, and then God constantly wanting to repair us. And that is there's tension there, right? Even though it's goodness to repair, sometimes I think of the image of like a magnet, right? And how sometimes our differences can feel so polarizing. And yet if we can slow down and get curious and notice what's happening inside us, something can transform there. And I think this is what Jesus modeled so beautifully. It was really paradigm shift then, and it's still a paradigm shift now.
Yes. And adding to that, I think it's easy to see conflict as something wrong or bad. My Enneagram oneness really showed up there. Yeah. But when we learn to engage in conflict well, it can actually add so much beauty and depth to a relationship. The problem is so many of us never learn how to do this. So leaning in can feel scary. And one thing I loved about this chapter is how Pete talked about the difference between dirty and clean fighting. And that distinction really helped me think about what healthy conflict can look like. So when you think about Pete's concept of dirty fighting, what is it? And what are some common tactics that he talks about?
Yeah, so this would be in reference to kind of like how we show up in the room. I like to kind of use that language of like, when you, like, even if we think about this as you're listening, thinking about, okay, like when there's conflict, how does my body feel? What's showing up for me? How am I speaking, right? Or am I not speaking? Just noticing like you just did too. So dirty fighting techniques oftentimes take polarizing places. So we have like the avoidant kind of process where it's just like, I will do anything not to have conflict. And that can look like just silencing people. That can look like stonewalling is a good example of that. Or just denying the reality of something, like that didn't happen. Like, no, like, and so when you hurt someone and you're like, hey, I just want to like talk about what just happened. They're like, what are you talking about? It's like, wait, no, like something happened though. Like, can we just acknowledge it? And so sometimes the fear, right? If we're looking at all of this from like, am I moving out of love or am I moving out of fear? Am I moving out of a desire to want to create peace, right? Wholeness, reconciliation, all of those beautiful words. Or am I moving out of a place of fear? I'm fearful of what could happen here. Oftentimes dirty tactics are going to fall under that, right? That we're going to maybe sugarcoat things. So there's going to be some burdens attached to that are going to cause maybe more harm than good. And so I think of this on like a continuum of sorts, right? Where we can have aggressive behavior and then like on the other side, this passive behavior, or even a combination, right? Passive aggressive. And what clean fighting teaches us to do is to hold that that assertiveness, right? To be able to hold space for my thoughts and feelings matter and your thoughts and feelings matter. And so how can we communicate in such a way that doesn't kind of pull us apart, but allows us to both honor each other in this space, in our differences, in our conflict, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's so good. So that's dirty fighting.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about clean fighting?
Yeah. One of the things that I think can be really helpful when we're talking about clean fighting is just recognizing like I said before, this idea of assertiveness skills. And this isn't taught, right? One of the things that we talked about at the beginning here is like one of the challenges is like a lot of us weren't ever taught to have assertiveness skills, right? We either were taught one of the two extremes. And so this process is really helpful for those of us that maybe have just been steeped in either one of those contexts to be able to say, oh, okay, well, my perspective does matter. My voice does matter. This conflict does matter. And if we're on the receiving end of that, right, it does matter for them too. And can we hold the space for both of us? And so I think it does a really great job of recognizing that the conflict is the conflict, right? The person is not the problem. And I think that is a really helpful way of looking at it is, can we separate you and me from this problem and kind of put it outside of us, and then together collectively show up to kind of address that particular issue. One thing that I think I'll just add in that's not in the curriculum here that could be really helpful when we're thinking about clean fighting is an acronym for assertiveness skills. And it's actually, the acronym is HARD, because it's hard to be assertive, right?
So hard.
It's great. I'm never going to forget this. Yeah, it's so hard. Even though it can be hard, we can use this. And so the H stands for honesty. A stands for appropriate. R stands for respectful. And D stands for direct. And so these can be really helpful to remember as we're going into having a conversation about conflict, is how can we hold an honest space, and how do we do that appropriately, maybe through timing and like body language, maybe setting a time to have this conversation, and then respectful. Am I respecting myself, and am I respecting the person I'm having this conversation with? And then lastly, am I being direct? Am I stating what's true about this situation for me? So this could just be another way, and we're going to practice this and actually look at what it looks like. But this is the essence of what we're going to be doing in this skill.
When you think about learning to use these assertiveness skills, do you have maybe like a story or an example from your own life you could share? Something that might give us a good picture of what it looks like to put those skills into practice?
That's a really good question. There's been a few times. I think something more recent would just be with collegiate relationships and being able to notice my body, notice like, oh, I'm having a problem with this. So I need to stop and get curious. I went and did my ladder of integrity, right? And then being able to show back up in that space and ask for a conversation. Say like, hey, I think we really need to have a conversation. I value this and I really want to communicate that. And then to be able to sit down. And honestly, it's a blessing when you can have other people that are moving towards that end, right? So this is a different conversation if we were talking about having a conflict with someone that is not really open to that, right? But in this particular situation, being able to show up, slow down, right? Be invited into a conversation to address my concerns or the group's concerns in that case. It went really well. And I believe that has been years of practice to be able to notice and slow down, because I am more reactive personality. And so noticing when I get angry, noticing when I get frustrated, having to really slow it down and be like, you know what, I'm going to take a step back from this, regulate my system, really get curious, maybe invite God into that process to be like, what do I need first? And then to be able to bring my complaint or the conflict at hand, address it with like a curiosity, and using some of this, like the honesty and direction of assertiveness skills has been such a gift to me. But for my personality, and it might be different for others, it starts with me slowing down, getting curious, and then moving towards this conversation with an openness of like, can we work together?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's walk through the steps of clean fighting.
Yeah.
So once we've slowed down, like you did, and notice something that we want to bring into a relationship, how do we do this well? Can you take us through the process step by step?
Yeah. Okay. So this one is, I would say, the most complex because it takes two people, right? In this, we're kind of going back and forth. But if you're the one saying, okay, I'm practicing this in my life, I'm going to bring it to someone, it's quite easy for you to be the one leading the conversation. So first, the question that I would encourage people to even reflect on as we're talking about this in real time is state the problem. And we can state the problem, right? This is the direction. This is the honesty that we need, is like, I'm going to be very direct and honest about what the problem is. I've noticed. So an example of this could be, I've noticed you get frustrated with me when we're arguing, right? I've noticed you get up and walk away when we're arguing and you're just frustrated with me, right? So again, what we're trying to do is be concrete about the behavior, about the oftentimes people will say something like, oh, they were acting just like this person, or you're being like this, right? Or he is this way. And it's like, well, okay, it's not just him or she, it's not the person, but what behavior, what specific behavior is what behavior is what is the problem there, right? Is it because they yelled at you? Is it because they didn't talk to you when you needed them to? Is it a pattern of behavior? So we want to be really specific about what you're noticing about the behavior of the person rather than like the person being the problem themselves. I've noticed, there's so many lists on here. I could keep going. There's like a whole list of examples of like how we could notice things. I notice you don't answer your emails. I notice you pick up your cell phone at least 3 times when we're together, right? Like these are just being really clear about what the behavior is, and then the emotional issue for you associated with it. So then state why it's important to you, right? I value blank. Maybe I value communication, or I value one-on-one time together. I value that you're listening to me, being heard, right? Those types of things. And then the following sentence stem is kind of like step 3. And this is where we kind of put it together, right? It's very similar to an I statement for those of you that know what an I statement is. So when you blank, I feel blank, right? And this is kind of that last piece where we're tying it in. Like when you don't listen to me and you're on your phone, I feel like you don't care about me, or I feel that I'm being left out, right? Or whatever it is there for you, it's going to be naming the feeling that the behavior is causing for you. And then lastly, this is 4 steps in a row, so it's a lot of content to process through. But the last step there is state your request clearly, respectfully, and specifically. Right? This is where we're saying this can't keep happening. Right? I need a change in this conflict in order to move forward. And this could be a specific request. This could be asking for a time. Like, hey, can we have a set aside time to hang out, or we don't use our phones? Or could we have, this is where a negotiation kind of comes in. And that's the most important part of this. This is where the listener gets to then actually negotiate with the speaker at that point. So those are the steps of the speaker, right? It's stating what I noticed the problem is, stating why it's important to me, and then filling it in with how it feels when this problem occurs. And then asking for what you want, asking for what you need, right? And then that's where the listener gets to move into, and what you'll notice, this kind of happens organically so that the listener doesn't need these steps. But what oftentimes will happen is like, is this request, can we agree on this request? Sometimes it's a yes. It's an easy yes. Like, of course, like in my situation, if I'm applying it, like it was a disagreement on how we did stuff as a team. And so we were able to say like, hey, next time, can we all be in agreement of how we're going to do these steps? And it was like, oh my gosh, yes. We all agreed, which is great. That doesn't always happen though. Right. And so being able to notice, like, if you have a request that's being made and the person's like, I can't do that. Like, that's not going to work for me. Then what are you willing to do? Right. Like, are you willing to do all of it, some of it, or none of it? And I love this question for the person bringing the complaint. If we can offer a possible solution, right, going back to one of our previous skills, and then that other person can say, no, they can, then we're moving again forward. This is the hardest part. It's when we get rejected, right? And then we have to move towards again with, what are you willing to do? Like, is there any part on the other person's end that they're willing to participate in? So I'll say that question again because it's so good. Are you willing to do all of this, part of it, or none of it at all? And that's where we get to kind of modify the request and negotiate the outcome, right? Okay, what are we able to do to get to a solid yes from both people? And then from there, the last piece together is writing this out or putting it in our phones and saying, this is the agreement. And then let's pick a time to come back to this in 3 weeks, a month, whatever the date could be, to just check in to see if it's working for us. And that's where that unity piece comes in, right? Because then we're saying, this is what we're doing together. This is the commitment we've made to each other in it. And let's check back in to see how it's going.
That's so good. As you're sharing these steps, I'm realizing just how much intentionality and self-awareness is needed for a healthy conflict. So I'm wondering if you could speak to 2 different kinds of people.
Okay.
So first, can you speak to the person who's bringing a request? Maybe someone who's practicing this skill for the first time or who generally finds it hard to voice their needs or concerns. Speak to me. I tend to lean more on that side of the spectrum. And then can you also speak to the receiver who might be feeling some reactivity or defensiveness when a request is brought to them? What encouragement might you offer?
I think you hit it there, right? Just by saying like reactivity, because in either state, we're still reacting, right? And so I think for both the listener or the one giving or receiving, right? However that looks, the first step is really noticing, right? Because we bring a whole story into our conversation, right? Our histories, our personality, our perceptions of conflict are showing up in the room. And so I really like this question of like, who's showing up in the room with you? Because you're bringing all your parts with you, So being able to notice that can be really helpful on both ends. How do you receive feedback? How has that gone bad before, right? And on the other end, like how has being heard when you want to give feedback, right? If you haven't been heard or your voice has been shut down, of course, giving feedback is going to be hard, right? Of course. And to the other side, like if conflict was something that was so distressing in childhood because it was so intensified for whatever reason, of course, avoiding conflict is going to be the safest option. And so what I think the spiritual formation movement here is for whatever personality type we are, is to engage with this in a different way. Like if you love conflict and you just love letting people have it, maybe the invitation is to get quiet and gentle and soften to bring unity, because oftentimes that tone and texture doesn't bring unity often. And then on the other side of that, if it is really hard to engage, my encouragement is like conflict is okay. A conflict is necessary for deepening relationship. And I had a recent conversation about this with my pastor and mentor, and I had done a training at my church, and afterward, people were like, "Oh, that was so good. And I got a lot of positive feedback, but I was like, I need someone to be honest with me. Like, I just need someone to like give me like the true feedback. Cause I think there is sometimes like this fear of like, oh, like they did good, but they don't actually give like honest feedback. And so I moved towards and was like, hey, I need constructive feedback too. Like sometimes maybe the practice is to invite that in so that we can practice receiving it with grace and also allowing other people to feel like, oh, she's safe enough for me to be honest with her. And that's hard. It's hard. And I will say, I'll go first in saying that receiving feedback has been a lifelong process, because my history informs that it was really harmful. And so now being able to be like, it's okay to mess up. It's okay to mess up. Like it's okay that I said something wrong, and I can be like, yeah, I did. I said something wrong, and I can repair. I can try again. A phrase I use all of the times with my friends is like, when something happens and conflict arises, and if we can just nip it in the bud immediately to be like, hey, can you try that again? Like it's a really simple statement. And how that can so easily, if practice can help us try again and say it in a different way that maybe is a little less rough or a little more kind. So these are just all the thoughts that I have when it comes to it. But for either side of the conversation, the invitation is come, try it, practice poorly. Another quick story about this is like being able to apologize, right? And be able to say, I'm still learning, right? There's one sweet family in my church. he uses this with his son, and he's taught his son to say, "I'm sorry, Daddy, I'm still learning." And like, I love that because like it allows him to hold space for like, it's okay that I'm still learning. I can apologize and say I'm still learning. And so I'm like, I'm going to adopt that. Like, sorry, I'm still learning how to do this because it's hard. Being in relationship is hard, and conflict is normal. And moving towards it with grace and gentleness is a invitation to bring the Holy Spirit in and to quiet ourselves. So it's something that we continue to practice daily if we want to.
Well, I'd love to wrap us up with one more quote from Pete. He says, and I love this, that conflict is a critical pathway to deeper knowledge of God, others, and ourselves. You just touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on how conflict has served as a catalyst for growth in your own life and relationships.
Yeah, I would say like on those three levels, right? Like inner conflict with self, then conflict with others, and conflict with God, right? We could kind of see that on all three planes, and how what I see the most treasure in all of these areas is that it really reveals the parts of us that need healing, right? And so we use this idea of like trailheads in the therapeutic space. Like when conflict arises, it's literally, this is what I think is so beautiful about it, and I could go off on this for a while, is like conflict allows us to recognize where we maybe need healing. And how beautiful is it that we were created for relationships in order to point back to those places that need healing, right? We can say this over and over again, but like healing in relationship is ironic because we've also been harmed in relationship. And so it's such a cyclical thing of like the idea of the harm that's been done, or the beliefs and the experiences that do now show up in our bodies. We actually get to heal those through relationships. And I think that that's such a powerful image of the gospel, of how the Lord did come to restore those things. And he did it as a human. Like he brought Jesus to earth in bodily form, so he could embody that and show us a way. And so I think there's just such a beautiful piece of that, and it's really reframed my perspective on it to be able to say, okay, when I get activated, when there's conflict, I can then get curious about like, what is this that points to a place in my life that maybe the Lord is inviting me to heal? And am I willing to go there with this person? And a huge disclaimer on this is like, that is not always possible with certain people in our lives. So I want to like make sure I say that not everybody's a safe person. And there's different ways to address that. And I would say, if you're feeling stuck in conflict perpetually, please see a spiritual mentor, a therapist, someone else outside of yourself. But ultimately, like the work of day-to-day conflict, that's like a lower level. I do believe is such an invitation to see God like draw us to himself and to others.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Carly. I'm going to be reflecting on so much of what we talked about today. Next week is our final episode in this series on developing a rule of life. And I'm really excited to wrap things up with some reflections and practical takeaways. But I'm just so grateful for you, Carly.
Oh, this has been such a gift. I can't wait for next week.
I've been reflecting on so much of this conversation, and I think my favorite part was when Carly extended the invitation to approach conflict as a beginner. As she said, come, try it, and practice poorly. Conflict is hard, complicated, and messy, but as we talked about, it doesn't require perfection. Staying present with one another and leaning into the tension can actually be a place of deep formation and growth. Next week, we're going to wrap up this series with an episode on developing a rule of life. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to subscribe so you're notified when new episodes release, and I'll see you next week. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.